More than 40 years have passed since Airwolf first thundered onto American television screens, and the men and women who flew that legendary helicopter through prime time lived out lives full of triumph, heartbreak, and reinventions that nobody watching back in 1984 could have predicted. One of them married and divorced a genuine Broadway legend in less time than it takes most shows to shoot a single season. Another spent decades living in the shadow of his own famous father, and ended up trapped inside two of the most quietly mocked sequel series in television history. A third helped give voice to one of the most beloved artificial intelligences in science fiction television, and very nearly lost everything, including a roof over her head, in the years that followed. Before any character ever appeared on screen, it was one particular voice that told viewers what they were about to watch. The deep, gravelly, unmistakable tone of Lance LeGault, who served as Airwolf's uncredited narrator, and also turned up in several one-episode guest roles, including the corrupt sheriff J.J. Bogan and the characters D.G. Bogard and Noble Flowers. He was 48 years old when the series began, and his path to that microphone was one of the more unusual in the entire cast. Born William Lance LeGault on May 2, 1935, in Chicago, Illinois, he began his show business career not as an actor at all, but as a stunt double for Elvis Presley, working on several of the King's 1960s films, including Girls, 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 Kissin' Cousins, Viva Las Vegas, and Roustabout. That early proximity to Presley's stardom shaped the rest of his career, giving him a physical presence and commanding screen energy that translated directly into acting roles once he moved in front of the camera instead of standing in for someone else behind it. LeGault became one of television's most reliable that guy character actors of the 1980s, best known for playing the blustering Colonel Roderick Decker on The A-Team and Colonel Buck Green on Magnum P.I., a role that, fittingly, connected him to Donald Bellisario's production world well before Airwolf ever called on his voice. He also appeared in the bit parts on The Incredible Hulk and The Dukes of Hazzard, and after Airwolf wrapped, he kept working steadily, turning up in MacGyver, Major Dad, Quantum Leap, and even Star Trek: The Next Generation. Away from the screen, LeGault maintained a second, quieter career as a lounge and nightclub singer, a throwback to his earliest days performing before he ever stood in for Elvis Presley on a film set. Lance LeGault died of heart failure in 2012 at the age of 77. A voice most viewers never saw a face attached to, who spent decades as one of Hollywood's most dependable hired guns. When Airwolf returned to television in January of 1987 on the USA Network, almost nothing about the show was the same as before. The cast had been rebuilt from the ground up, the budget had been slashed to a fraction of its former size, and standing in the middle of that reinvention was a company operative named Jason Locke. The man who played him was Anthony Sherwood. He was 37 years old when the fourth season began, and he brought to the role a seriousness that few viewers realized was rooted in a genuinely remarkable life story. Anthony Sherwood was born in 1949 in the Africville neighborhood of Halifax, Nova Scotia, into a black Nova Scotian family with deep and storied musical roots. His grandmother, Alice Kane, was an accomplished musician and music teacher. His mother sang. His first cousin once removed was Portia White, the trailblazing contralto, who became Canada's first black opera singer to achieve international acclaim. Sherwood's family later moved to Montreal, where he grew up in the historic neighborhood of Little Burgundy, immersed from childhood in a rich tradition of black Canadian music and performance. Before he ever stepped in front of a camera, Sherwood spent nearly 8 years as a working rhythm and blues singer, building his stage presence in clubs and theaters long before he considered acting a career. He shifted into musical theater in Montreal in the mid-1970s, starring in productions of Ain't Misbehavin', Cabaret, and The Music Man. His film career began in 1979, and by 1986 he had been cast in Airwolf, stepping into a role that would introduce him to American television audiences on a scale his stage career never had. After Airwolf ended, Sherwood found his signature role far closer to home. Dylan Beck, a Toronto lawyer, on the acclaimed CBC legal drama Street Legal, which he played for 5 seasons and which earned him a Gemini Award nomination. But acting was only one part of what Sherwood built. In 1991, he founded his own production company, dedicating himself almost entirely to documentary filmmaking that explored African Canadian history and the fight for racial equality. His documentary, Honor Before Glory, about Canada's only all-black military battalion in the First World War, won a Gemini Award. For 7 years, he hosted the Discovery Channel documentary series Forbidden Places. From 1992 to 2001, he served as national co-chairman of Canada's March 21st campaign for the elimination of racism. In 2022, Sherwood received the Queen Elizabeth II Platinum Jubilee Medal for his decades of cultural and civic contribution. And that same year, he served as Master of Ceremonies for the Canadian government's official apology to the black soldiers of the all-black No. 2 Construction Battalion and their descendants, a cause that traced directly back to the documentary work he had begun decades earlier. Today, in 2026, Anthony Sherwood is 77 years old, still active as a filmmaker, novelist, and public speaker. The company operative from Airwolf spent the following decades quietly becoming one of Canada's most honored chroniclers of its own difficult history. The rebuilt Airwolf of 1987 needed a hotshot Air Force pilot with an attitude problem, and it found one in Major Mike Rivers, brought to life by a young Welsh-Canadian actor named Geraint Wyn Davies. He was 29 years old when the fourth season began, and although Airwolf would not be the role that defined his career, it placed him on a path toward one of the most peculiar and beloved cult roles in 1990s genre television. Geraint Wyn Davies was born on April 20th, 1957, in Swansea, Wales, the son of a Congregationalist minister and a schoolteacher who later became a headmistress. At the age of 7, his family relocated to Canada, where he attended Upper Canada College and began studying business and economics at the University of Western Ontario before abandoning that path entirely for the stage. He made his professional theatrical debut in 1976 in Quebec City at the age of 19, and over the following decade, built a serious classical resume, including 2 seasons with Theatre Clwyd, Wales's leading theatre company, performing Enemy of the People and Hamlet across the United Kingdom. 5 years after Airwolf ended, Davies found the role that would make him a cult icon, Nick Knight, an 800-year-old vampire working as a homicide detective in modern Toronto, on the syndicated series Forever Knight, which ran from 1992 to 1996. The show developed a devoted international fan base and is still cited today as an important forerunner of the vampire detective genre that would later produce shows like True Blood and The Vampire Diaries. In a strange twist, Davies would go on to play 2 different vampires across his career, having also portrayed one in Dracula the series. Davies never abandoned the stage. He spent 21 combined seasons performing at Canada's prestigious Stratford and Shaw festivals, played the title role in Cyrano de Bergerac at the Shakespeare Theatre in Washington, D.C., winning a Helen Hayes Award for it, and appeared as Edmund opposite Christopher Plummer's King Lear at Lincoln Center. His television work continued steadily into the 2000s, with recurring and guest roles on 24, Murdoch Mysteries, and Slings and Arrows. He became a United States citizen in June 2006 in a ceremony at the Supreme Court presided over by Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg herself. Davies was married to Canadian artist Alana Ginn from 1985 to 2006, and the couple had 2 children. In August 2011, he married actress Claire Laudier. Today, in 2026, Geraint Wyn Davies is 69 years old, still performing on stage and screen. A Welsh boy from Swansea who became one of Canadian theatre's most respected leading men, by way of a low-budget helicopter show that almost nobody remembers he was ever a part of. For 6 seasons, Stringfellow Hawke's brother, St. John, existed only as a photograph and a wound that never healed. Then, in 1987, Airwolf resurrected him as the new lead of its dramatically overhauled 4th season, and the man who stepped into the cockpit was Barry Van Dyke. He was 35 years old when the role began, and he carried into it a burden that had shaped his entire life and career, being the son of one of the most beloved entertainers in American television history. Barry Van Dyke was born on July 31st, 1951, in Atlanta, Georgia, the second son of Dick Van Dyke and his first wife, Margie Willett. His television debut came at age 9, playing a young violinist in an episode of The Dick Van Dyke Show, alongside his older brother Christian. But his father insisted he wait before pursuing show business seriously, wanting him to have an ordinary childhood first, advice that delayed but never derailed the inevitable. Before Airwolf, Van Dyke had already lived through one of television's most infamous cases of diminishing returns, a starring role as Lieutenant Dillon in Galactica 1980, the widely mocked, short-lived sequel to the original Battlestar Galactica, which is remembered by science fiction fans largely as a cautionary tale in franchise mismanagement. Taking on the lead of a similarly reconstituted, drastically downsized Airwolf 7 years later, gave Van Dyke the unusual and unwanted distinction of having starred in two of the most disparaged sequel series of the entire decade. A fact fans of both franchises have never let him forget. Even as most critics agree, he brought more genuine effort to both roles than the material around him deserved. His fortunes changed permanently in 1993 when his father cast him as Lieutenant Detective Steve Sloan, son to Dick Van Dyke's doctor, Mark Sloan in Diagnosis: Murder. The show ran for 8 seasons until 2001, with Barry not only acting but also writing and directing multiple episodes, finally giving him the creative ownership that a lifetime of following in his father's footsteps had made him hungry for. Father and son would go on to work together again in the Murder 101 television films in the mid-2000s. In 1974, Van Dyke married Mary Carey, whom he had met when they were both 16 years old. The marriage lasted until 2017 and produced 4 children, all of whom eventually appeared alongside their father and grandfather on Diagnosis: Murder. An accomplished private pilot with licenses for both fixed-wing aircraft and helicopters, Van Dyke found a genuine, lasting connection to the very machines his most infamous role had asked him to fly. Today, in 2026, Barry Van Dyke is 74 years old, still active in the industry, a hard-working, well-liked character actor who spent a career proving that the son of a legend can still be entirely his own man. The retooled Airwolf needed someone to fly the helicopter with the same easy confidence Caitlin O'Shaughnessy once had. And it introduced Jo Santini, Dominic's previously unmentioned niece, played by Canadian actress Michelle Scarabelli. She was 31 years old when the 4th season began, and she would later admit publicly just how little creative freedom the role actually offered her. Michelle Scarabelli was born on April 11, 1955, in Montreal, Quebec, and raised there before earning a degree in psychology from McGill University. She began her career as a model before turning to acting in the early 1980s, appearing in the horror classic Prom Night, and gradually building a resume of television guest spots throughout the decade. In a Starlog magazine interview about her time on Airwolf, Scarabelli candidly noted that all 24 scripts for the season had already been written before the cast even arrived, leaving the actors almost no room to shape or develop their characters. A rare, honest acknowledgement of just how mechanically the revived series had been assembled. 2 years after Airwolf ended, Scarabelli found the role that would define her career: Susan Francisco, a tank-to-knees newcomer alien assimilating into human society, on the acclaimed Fox science fiction series Alien Nation, a part she reprised across 5 subsequent television movies. In 1991, she appeared in the celebrated Star Trek: The Next Generation episode In Theory, playing Lieutenant Jenna DeSora, a brief romantic partner to Brent Spiner's android officer, Lieutenant Commander Data, one of the most fondly remembered standalone character episodes in the franchise's history. She also spent 6 episodes in 1988, playing Ray Krebs' unstable lover on the primetime soap Dallas. Scarabelli's career has continued into the streaming era with remarkable staying power. Between 2021 and 2024, she appeared in the CW series Superman and Lois as Martha Kent, bringing a lifetime of genre television experience to one of American pop culture's most iconic maternal figures. A full-circle moment for an actress whose career has spanned science fiction from the analog 1980s all the way into modern superhero television. Today, in 2026, Michelle Scarabelli is 71 years old and continues to work steadily in film and television, a performer whose quiet versatility has kept her relevant across 5 different decades of the medium. Behind Archangel and the firm stood Morella, the composed, dependable intelligence liaison who kept the Airwolf operation connected to its chain of command through the show's first 2 seasons. She was played by Deborah Pratt, who was 32 years old when the series began, and whose life after Airwolf would prove to be one of the most quietly dramatic behind-the-scenes stories connected to the entire show. Deborah M. Pratt was born on December 16, 1951, in Chicago, Illinois, to an African-American family with a proud military legacy. Her father, Colonel Bertram Robertson Pratt, had commanded the segregated 827th Tank Destroyer Battalion in Europe during the Second World War. Pratt earned a psychology degree from Webster University while studying theater on the side. And her performing career began unexpectedly when a nationwide talent search brought her to Hollywood under contract to NBC, where she sang and danced on The Dean Martin Show, alongside the Gold Diggers, performing with Gene Kelly and Donald O'Connor, and touring with Debbie Reynolds. Pratt married Airwolf creator Donald P. Bellisario in June 1984, and the couple had 2 children, including a daughter, Troyan, who would later become widely known to audiences of her own generation as an actress on Pretty Little Liars under the name Troyan Bellisario. Pratt departed Airwolf after its 2nd season, when Bellisario himself left the show amid creative and budget disputes with CBS. She went on to become co-creator, executive producer, and head writer of Bellisario's next major series, Quantum Leap, for which she also provided the voice of Ziggy, one of television's earliest depictions of an artificial intelligence character, and earned multiple Emmy nominations. What most fans never knew is that even after the acclaim of Quantum Leap, Pratt endured a genuinely difficult period in her personal life, including a stretch of homelessness, before rebuilding her career from the ground up through sheer persistence. She went on to become a published novelist with several works to her name, including the science fantasy Vision Quest trilogy and the young adult fantasy novel Mirrors, which she is now adapting into a film of her own. She directed episodes of network television, including Grey's Anatomy, and returned in 2022 as executive producer of the Quantum Leap reboot for NBC and Peacock, directing an episode of the revival herself in 2023. Along the way, she has been nominated for a Golden Globe and 5 separate Primetime Emmy Awards, and has received the Lillian Gish Award from Women in Film for her contributions to the industry. Today, in 2026, Deborah Pratt is 74 years old, an author, director, and industry veteran who has served on the boards of the Writers Guild, the Directors Guild, and SAG-AFTRA, using her hard-won position to advocate for greater representation across Hollywood. When Airwolf moved away from its darker, espionage-heavy first season, CBS wanted a more grounded, approachable presence to soften the show, and the answer was Caitlin O'Shaughnessy, a sharp, capable former Texas Highway Patrol helicopter pilot who joined the operation in Season 2. She was played by Jean Bruce Scott, who was 28 years old when she joined the cast, and who would go on to build one of the most quietly influential second careers of anyone connected to the series. Jean Bruce Scott was born on February 25, 1956, in Monterey, California, the daughter of an Army officer who later worked for the Alyeska Pipeline Service Company. At just 13 years old, she entered a Girl of the Year contest sponsored by Teen Magazine. Although she didn't win, the magazine used her photograph for its cover and featured her in a swimsuit layout regardless, launching a modeling career that led directly into acting. She began working professionally at 14, appearing in commercials for RCA, Band-Aid, and Head & Shoulders before landing recurring roles on Days of Our Lives, Saint Elsewhere, and Magnum P.I., the last of which connected her directly to Airwolf creator Donald Bellisario before she ever joined his helicopter show. After leaving Hollywood in the late 1980s to complete her college education, Scott's path took a dramatic and unexpected turn away from acting entirely. She began teaching acting at Illinois State University in 1993, and that same decade, she co-founded with her husband, playwright Randy Reinholtz, an organization called Native Voices, dedicated to developing and producing new theatrical works by Native American, Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian, and First Nations playwrights, As founding executive director of the Native Voices at the Awe Tree, the only actors' equity theater company in the country devoted entirely to Indigenous playwrights, Scott spent more than 25 years building what became one of the most respected platforms for Native American storytelling in American theater, stepping down to emeritus status in 2020 after retiring from day-to-day leadership in 2019. Scott married television writer Robert Coleman in 1980 and later married Randy Reinholz in 1989, a partnership that has now lasted more than 3 decades and produced their shared theatrical legacy. Today, in 2026, Jean Bruce Scott is 70 years old, retired from acting and largely out of the public eye, but her influence persists quietly through the continued work of the theater company she built. Proof that the feisty helicopter pilot audiences loved in the 1980s went on to spend a quarter of a century amplifying voices that Hollywood had rarely made room for. Every hero needs a handler he doesn't quite trust. And for Stringfellow Hawke, that man was Michael Archangel, formerly Michael Goldsmith Briggs III, the mysterious eye-patch-wearing intelligence operative of the firm. He was played by Alex Cord across 55 episodes and 3 seasons, and he was 50 years old when the series began, carrying behind him a personal history of resilience that predated his acting career entirely. Alex Cord was born Alexander Viespi Jr. on May 3, 1933, in Floral Park, New York, to an Italian-American family. At the age of 12, he was stricken with polio. His family relocated to Wyoming, where doctors recommended horseback riding as physical therapy, and by 16 he had fully recovered, an experience that instilled in him a lifelong passion for horses and rodeo that would follow him for the rest of his life. He studied at New York University and the American Shakespeare Theater in Stratford, Connecticut, building a serious stage foundation before moving into film and television in the early 1960s under his birth name. Cord's breakout screen role came in 1966, when he starred in a remake of the classic Western Stagecoach, and he later appeared opposite Kirk Douglas in 1968's The Brotherhood. Over the following decades, he built a steady career as a reliable, versatile presence across American television, with guest appearances on Gunsmoke, Mission Impossible, The $6 Million Man, and Fantasy Island. In 1978, 3 years before Airwolf, Cord took the lead in an NBC primetime drama called W.E.B., playing a ruthless network programming executive in a show about the inner workings of television itself. The series lasted only 5 episodes before cancellation, but it holds one small, curious footnote in Hollywood history. Actress Demi Moore has said that W.E.B. marked her professional acting debut, meaning Cord shared the screen with a total unknown who would go on to become one of the biggest movie stars of her generation, years before anyone could have guessed it. Still, it was Airwolf, and specifically the character of Archangel, that became the role most audiences would remember Cord for. After Airwolf, Cord continued working steadily into the 1990s and 2000s with roles on Walker, Texas Ranger, Murder, She Wrote, and Law & Order, Special Victims Unit, his final screen credit coming in the 2009 film Fire from Below. Off-camera, Cord never gave up his equestrian roots, competing in rodeo events and eventually settling on a ranch in Cook County, Texas, where he raised horses alongside his close friend, fellow Western actor Robert Fuller, whom he had first met decades earlier on the set of Laramie. Fuller was so taken with Cord's description of life in Texas that he and his wife relocated to the very same county in 2004, and the two men spent years afterward appearing together at Western film festivals, celebrating what both called the spirit of the cowboy. He also became a published author, writing several novels and, in 2020, a memoir titled From Wheelbarrow to Ferrari and Back Again. Cord was married 3 times over the course of his life. He died at his ranch home in Valley View, Texas on August 9, 2021 at the age of 88. A cowboy at heart who had spent his final years exactly where he always seemed most at home, in the saddle rather than in front of a camera. Every helicopter needs someone who understands it better than the man flying it, and for Airwolf, that man was Dominic Santini, the warm, grizzled owner of Santini Air and Hawke's closest friend. He was played by Ernest Borgnine, who was already an Academy Award winner, and one of the most recognizable character actors in American film when he joined the cast at 66 years old, bringing a level of gravitas to the show that few 1980s action series could claim. Ernest Borgnine was born Hermes Efren Borgnino on January 24, 1917, in Hamden, Connecticut, to Italian immigrant parents. He served in the United States Navy from 1935 to 1941 aboard the destroyer minesweeper USS Lamberton, and after his discharge returned home with no direction until his mother suggested, almost offhandedly, that his larger-than-life personality might suit the stage. A decade later, in one of the most famous underdog stories in Hollywood history, Grace Kelly was handing him the Academy Award for Best Actor for his sensitive, against-type performance as a lonely Bronx butcher in 1955's Marty, a role for which he beat out Spencer Tracy, Frank Sinatra, James Dean, and James Cagney. Long before Airwolf, Borgnine had already cemented his legacy playing Lieutenant Commander Quentin McHale on the beloved sitcom McHale's Navy from 1962 to 1966. His personal life in that era produced one of the most famously short marriages in Hollywood history. In June 1964, Borgnine married Broadway legend Ethel Merman, the First Lady of musical comedy herself. The marriage collapsed almost immediately. The couple separated after just 32 days, reportedly after Borgnine drew more fan attention than Merman during their honeymoon, and their divorce was finalized that November. Merman never remarried, and when she published her 1978 autobiography, she included a chapter titled My Marriage to Ernest Borgnine that consisted of a single blank page. A joke so widely repeated, it has become one of the most famous single anecdotes in all of Broadway lore. He was approached for Airwolf by producer Donald Bellisario after Bellisario saw him play a wrestler in a 1982 episode of Magnum P.I., and Borgnine agreed almost immediately. Behind the scenes, his strong on-camera performances masked real exhaustion. The grueling production schedule and the challenges of working alongside a younger, increasingly troubled leading man took a genuine toll on him during the show's 3-season run. Borgnine's career simply never slowed down after Airwolf ended. In 1995, he starred as doorman Manny Cordoba in The Single Guy, and became one of the most beloved voice actors of his generation, giving voice to the villainous Carface Carruthers in the All Dogs Go to Heaven franchise, and, from 1999 until his death, the elderly ex-superhero Mermaid Man on Nickelodeon's SpongeBob SquarePants, introducing him to an entirely new generation of viewers who had no idea he had ever flown a helicopter on television. Remarkably, he earned a Primetime Emmy nomination at age 92 for a 2009 guest appearance on ER. Married 5 times, his final marriage to Tova Borgnine lasted from 1973 until his death. Ernest Borgnine died of renal failure on July 8, 2012, at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles at the age of 95, a working actor almost literally to his final days, and one of the most enduring, beloved figures in the history of American television and film. And finally, him, the reclusive Vietnam veteran and Cellist pilot who flew the most advanced helicopter ever imagined on American television, and the man without whom Airwolf would simply not exist. Jan-Michael Vincent played Stringfellow Hawke, and he was 38 years old when the series began, already one of the most talked-about leading men in Hollywood, and already, quietly, in serious trouble. Jan-Michael Vincent was born on July 15, 1945, in Denver, Colorado, and raised in Hanford, California. He began acting in the late 1960s, appearing in episodes of Bonanza, Lassie, and Gunsmoke, before building a genuine film career through the 1970s with lead roles in The World's Greatest Athlete, Buster and Billy, and White Line Fever, and a memorable supporting turn opposite Burt Reynolds in 1978's Hooper. By the time he was cast as Stringfellow Hawke, following his role in the acclaimed miniseries The Winds of War, Vincent commanded a reported $200,000 per episode, making him, at the time, the highest-paid actor in American television. But the very qualities that made him magnetic on screen were already unraveling his life off of it. Vincent, who had already been arrested for cocaine possession 3 separate times in the late 1970s, continued to struggle openly with alcohol throughout the production of Airwolf, and was involved in bar fights that led to his arrest in both 1984 and 1985. His personal instability became so disruptive that it was cited as a contributing factor in CBS's decision to cancel the series after its 3rd season. He was, by every account, the most talented performer on the set, and also the reason the whole production eventually came apart. The years that followed were markedly harder. In 1988, shortly after Airwolf ended, Vincent was arrested again for drunk driving and avoided jail time only by entering a rehabilitation program. Vincent continued working in increasingly low-budget films through the 1990s, but in 1996, he broke his neck and damaged his vocal cords in a drunk driving accident in Mission Viejo, California. In a candid 2000 interview with ABC's 20/20, he admitted he remained sober only by what he called hanging on by my white knuckles. A second serious car accident followed in 2008, and in 2012, a subsequent infection led doctors to amputate part of his right leg. He spent his final years largely out of the public eye, in declining health in the American South. Jan-Michael Vincent died of cardiac arrest on February 10, 2019, in Asheville, North Carolina, at the age of 73, the highest paid actor in television history at his peak, and by the end, a cautionary tale that the rest of the cast around him has spent decades trying to reconcile with the gifted, charismatic young pilot they remember from the cockpit of Airwolf. There it is. An entire hidden world that existed behind the rotor blades of one of the most ambitious action shows of the 1980s. A rebuilt cast that never quite recaptured the original's magic. And an original cast whose triumphs and tragedies proved just as dramatic as anything the show ever put on screen. Some found lasting peace in ranches, theaters, and quiet second careers. Others were consumed by the very fame the role gave them. A few discovered their most meaningful work only after the cameras stopped rolling, in courtrooms of the imagination, in indigenous theater, in documentaries about history Hollywood had long ignored, and one of them never got the chance to grow old at all. But all of them are part of the same story. The story of how 3 years of episodes and one disastrous attempt to revive them became more than 4 decades of memory for the people who watched from the ground as Airwolf disappeared over the horizon. Tell us in the comments, which member of the Airwolf cast was your favorite? Let us know below. If you want to keep uncovering the real stories behind the classic shows and the people who made them, subscribe to this channel and ring the bell. Every week, we go past the legend and into the life.